now. Hi folks, we're just giving Zoom a few seconds to let people in here before we get started. If you are already in tonight's Zoom webinar with us, you can open up the chat window to find some information about how to purchase tonight's featured book. All right, good evening and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Chelsea from Greenlight, and we're excited to welcome you to our online event series, Squawkin Sports, hosted by Patrick Sauer and David J. Roth. For this installment, they'll be chatting with Claire McNear about her new book, Answers in the Form of Questions, a definitive history and insider's guide to Jeopardy. So you're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to our hosts, Patrick and David, and tonight's featured author, Claire, for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up. Though we're not able to host events in our store spaces, our community of authors and readers is still here. We're grateful for your support and for the chance to make this space for conversation and connection. Now I have just a couple of housekeeping things. First, in our Zoom webinar tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they cannot see you. They can see that you're here though, and we have a few different ways that you can interact with them throughout the event, which we highly encourage. The first is you're welcome to post your comments and thoughts in the chat. You can find that icon at the bottom of your Zoom window. It's one speech bubble. Commenting in the chat is a great way to show your appreciation for the author and to interact with fellow attendees. If you have a specific question you'd like to have answered by the author, please post that question in the Q&A module. You can find it by clicking on the icon at the bottom of your Zoom window that looks like two speech bubbles. We'll be pulling questions only from the Q&A to be answered in the later part of the program. We are recording tonight's event, so look for video or audio versions on our social channels and our YouTube channel later on. And importantly, tonight's featured book, Answers in the Form of Questions, is available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. We're excited to be able to offer actual shopping in our bookstore locations, noon to 7 p.m. every day. And you can purchase Claire's book and many others on site. Or order online at greenlightbookstore.com for a quick pickup at the store, or for shipping anywhere in the US. You can find that buy link in the chat. If you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. Our hosts for this evening are Patrick Sauer and David J. Roth. Patrick has written for many large publications you've heard of, and even more small ones that no longer exist. He's a founding member of the Billings, Montana to Brooklyn sports writing pipeline. David was an editor at Deadspin and is now a co-founder and co-owner at Defector.com. His writing has appeared in The New Republic, The New Yorker, Food and Wine, and The Baffler. They'll be speaking with featured author Claire McNear. She writes about sports and culture at The Ringer, where she has covered everything from a Property Brothers cruise to the Washington Nationals World Series run to the cult of the famed and feared Chicago-born liqueur Malort. Like so many others, she was brought up watching Jeopardy each and every weeknight with her family. She began this book and the regular Jeopardy column at The Ringer that led to it to attempt to realize her lifelong quest of finally shouting out the answers before her parents. Formerly of SB Nation, her work has also appeared in Sports Illustrated and Vice. Her new book, Answers in the Form of Questions, dives deep behind the scenes of beloved game show Jeopardy, with longtime host Alex Trebek talking about his life and legacy, and the show's producers and writers explaining how they put together the nightly game. This book looks to the past and the future to explain what Jeopardy really is, a tradition unlike any other. Claire is going to start us off with a reading from the book, and then she'll be talking with Patrick and David and with all of you. Claire, please take it away.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you for having me tonight. And thank you to Patrick and David for arranging this. This is a bittersweet time to be talking about Jeopardy, but I'm glad to have an occasion to do it with you all. So I will launch into the reading, which is from my third chapter, which is called Here is the Host of Jeopardy, Alex Trebek. Trebek was 44 when the Jeopardy revival debuted, but he wasn't not meant as eye candy. A story in the Los Angeles Times early in his Jeopardy tenure noted that he, with his signature mustache, could be an unusually handsome professor and was more than just another pretty suit, before making mention of the, quote, throbbing electronic Jeopardy set. People ran a breathless story on the then single host under the headline, "Sorry girls, Mom keeps house for Jeopardy host Alex Trebek," in reference to the fact that Lucille shared his Hollywood Hills mansion / bachelor pad. Trebek joked about asking out Wheel of Fortune hostess Vanna White, noting that she was quite intelligent. "She always turns me down," he said. In the mid-'80s, Jeopardy ran a series of ads showcasing the host as a Bond-esque man of mystery, rescuing various scantily clad damsels in distress. "We risked everything for these questions," gasped one just liberated woman as a tuxedo-clad Trebek rushed her past her captor's gunfire. "That's why we call it Jeopardy," the host replied. "Jeopardy is my life," he cooed to another woman who was wrapped in a bathrobe after being fished out of the sea by Trebek. Said he, "It's the second most exciting game I know." When Trebek ditched his soup strainer in 1997, it was mourned in People as one might an actual person. Host Alex Trebek, 59, has shaved off his mustache 20. The magazine pulled no punches. The headline was Alex Trebek naked. At his wedding to Jean Curvan in 1990, private security ejected no fewer than 5 tabloid reporters from the nuptials who could be overheard gabbing about Jean's dress to editors from a nearby payphone booth. For his vows, Trebek responded, "The answer is yes." They learned they were expecting their first child, Matthew, just 3 weeks after the ceremony. When Matthew was a baby, Trebek joked that he and Jean could hear him over the monitor in the morning humming the Jeopardy theme song. Fitting enough, given it was written for Merv Griffin's own infant son. As Trebek walks into his dressing room, he spots my phone on the table in front of his couch. It's there as a backup recording, just in case my actual recorder alongside it decides to eat our interview. "You're recording on both?" he asks, folding himself onto the couch. "Yes," I tell him, just in case. He leans eagerly over the phone. "Can you hear me now?" he asks more loudly, knocking furiously on the table. "Can you hear me?" He turns back to me and grins. "I just blew your machines right off," he says. Trebek has changed. He's ditched the button down and is now nearly stage ready, hair and makeup done, dressed in suit pants and shirt and tie, though no jacket. But he's tired. He's fighting a bad cold, not to point any fingers, but your reporter came down with her own bad cold a few days later and thought at one point he might even lose his voice. It's not helping that this week is filled as so few Jeopardy weeks are with new introductions, new cues, new gaps in the game. Later, I'll watch the tournament tape from the audience alongside a longtime studio hand who seems to be genuinely shocked on the handful of occasions that Trebek misspeaks or accidentally skips something that he has to go back and redo. Usually those kinds of things are so rare that he struggles to think of ever seeing more than 1 or 2 in a tape day. But this tournament has Trebek grumbling. By the week's end, the host will have had his fill of the stopping and starting, the subbing in of teammates and pausing so they can talk strategy off stage, and tells anyone who will hear it, he is never doing another All-Star Games. He's not the only one. A contestant tells me that he overheard the show's stage manager, John Lauderdale, who is also the stage manager at Wheel of Fortune, griping to executive producer Harry Friedman, "This is annoying as hell, man. The existing Jeopardy model works perfectly well. Thank you very much." Over 36 years with 5 suit changes 2 days a week, it is entirely possible that Trebek has worn more suits than anyone else in history. While we speak, I catch a glimpse of a rack in the adjoining closet that's lined with dozens of neat black and navy blazers. The ties can't be far behind. He claims to have never thrown any away, though some have been dispersed in Jeopardy giveaways, and boasts that he has bolo ties and even dreaded wide ties at home. I have more than 250, Trebek will say later, a little like it might be a threat or at least something Gene is extremely aware of. I have suits that are older than half the members of our staff, he says. Nothing gets thrown away. On game shows, it was long traditional for the host of the program to also be introduced as the star. On Jeopardy's first ever episode with Art Fleming in 1964, he was indeed introduced as such. And why not, given he's the one who was there week after week, season after season. So was Trebek on many of the shows he did before Jeopardy. He was the star of Mama No Mama, a dismal reboot of an Italian dating show, and on the $128,000 Question, a revival of its $64,000 predecessor, the host and star of our show. But when he took over the Jeopardy reboot in 1984, he was adamant. He was the host. The contestants were the stars, and Johnny Gilbert has introduced him accordingly ever since. But it's hard to deny the reality that nearly 40 years at the center of one of American television's most popular programs has given him some star power. When school and tour groups and game show obsessives line up outside for the chance to spend a couple of hours inside the Jeopardy studio, they're as interested, maybe more interested in seeing the host as they are in seeing all those shiny blue set pieces. So great is the demand that the show has put out alongside an enormous glass case with the dozens of gleaming Emmys racked up by Jeopardy over the years, a cardboard cutout of Trebek in the lobby for people to take pictures with, and do they ever? It takes a little while to get to like somebody, Trebek says of television, leaning back into the couch cushions.
Very nice. One note, this book has all these incredible details that the theme song that Merv Griffin wrote for his son grossed $70 million over its lifespan.
At
That's
least.
insane.
Yeah, I think it's up to 80 plus now.
I mean, that's something. Let's talk about Alex a little later. Let's start with the show itself, which at one point...
You're talking about Mama No Mama. We're going to talk about Mama No Mama, right?
Yeah, it's great.
You can talk about Jeopardy too if you want, Patrick. Whatever you want. It's your show.
Well, actually, because of the book, I went back and watched quiz. I showed my daughter Quiz Show, which is incredible. Mm-hmm. But that show is so boring. Like the actual
21,
quiz,
yeah.
21. Yeah, it is so boring. And that actually brings to the point, I think, in the book that really stands out is that from the get-go, it was supposed to be cerebral and entertaining, which both works for your book. But the show has never wavered for that, even with all the bells and whistles. And I think we should start there just by, it has always been a landing spot for people who fancy themselves smart.
Yeah, it really was formed as a response to the quiz show scandals when Merv Griffin kind of, and with his wife, came up with the idea of Jeopardy, which is, the 61 clues, but also this answering in the form of a question. That was really kind of a playful thing, pointing to the then very recent quiz show scandals. They were directly giving the answers to the contestants, which since those scandals has been illegal. There's a federal law saying you can't do that anymore. So there is this playfulness that is, very much in Jeopardy's DNA, but it is uncompromising. It really has not gone with whatever game show trends. It's just very staid, very neat and tidy. They've trimmed out all the fat. It really hasn't changed much. You watch an episode from, Trebek's early years in the 80s, and other than the graphics and the silly mustache and silly suits, it's the same exact show.
And when did you said you grew up watching with your family? What was your sort of personal history, and why did you start writing about it at the Ringer? Because you had a column, or you wrote it. I know you wrote about it at least occasionally.
Yeah, so it was something I grew up with. I was not like a Jeopardy diehard. There are people who grow up in like a family where it's like, do not ever call this house at 7 o'clock, and my family was not like that. But it was always there, and we didn't watch any other game shows. It was just that's the only one. That's the good game show. but I kind of fell out of it. I stopped watching in high school, didn't have cable in college, didn't have cable right after college, and it just wasn't really in my life. And I moved in with my now fiance about 5 years ago, and we got cable. And I remember having this like realization that we could start DVRing Jeopardy and watch Jeopardy together every night and compete. And it felt like this incredible grown-up thing that we could do. And that led to me just pitching stories about it at the Ringer about, the latest viral clue or whatever happens, because there's always something on Jeopardy. Like weird things happen pretty regularly, and there is like this huge audience, like 10 million people watch it every night, and somehow that turned into a book.
I learned a lot about the show Jeopardy from your book about Jeopardy, so thank you for that.
I'm glad.
One thing that I'm embarrassed to admit that I learned for the first time is that it existed before Alex Trebek was the host. And so it was Art Fleming, I believe was the name of the guy that hosted it before. It was a brief run. And also it was super popular then. I mean, I guess it's just like, it's a perfect idea. To me, the thing that I was struck by was, I guess that like initially when it transitioned from, it was Fleming, then there was a break, and then it was Trebek, right? That there was like a few years where it wasn't. That like, it seems like there's always been, even if it is, as you said, like it's sort of like there's a through line that makes it comfortable viewing and that has like sort of kept it there. It also seems like there is, in the way of everything else on Earth, like everybody remembers it being better, harder, and more interesting 5 or 10 years ago. Like, what is actually different? Like, was the Fleming show, I'm assuming you watched a bunch of episodes of, for work, but like, what is different about the show now relative to what it was?
Can I say real quick?
Yeah.
I did know about the Fleming show because I was 13 when the Weird Al Yankovic Greg Kinn parody came out, and I owned the 45.
That's a flex. That is, I don't
amazing.
Even super
amazing.
Powerful.
I mean, but that song is about the original Jeopardy. Like it came out just as the new Jeopardy was coming on the air, so it was really kind of about that earlier version. A little bit has changed, but not really that much. I mean, there is this perpetual myth, right, that back in my day it was really serious stuff.
Yeah, the way that music used to be better.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that it hasn't changed much, and that's some of the beauty of it. Like as I was saying earlier, I mean, the fundamental model of it, the 61 clues, the half hour, that pretty much has always been the case. I think a thing that has happened more in recent years is they've kind of eagerly embraced pop culture, and like very like online pop culture too. And I mean, they only go so far. It is Jeopardy, but like the writers make a kind of a conscious effort to expand beyond that like traditional fussy academic trivia canon of just stuff you might have learned in school. They do actively try to make it fun.
Yeah, I was struck by that. You mentioned, I think that there was a category that was called like I Can Has Cheeseburger or something like that. Yeah. So the idea that means that Alex Trebek said those words like on TV and everybody saw it.
Yeah. And I mean, and of course, one of the things that has gone viral a lot in recent years is they really liked giving him rap lyrics to read. And I mean, and he was awful. He was so bad. And I mean, I actually asked him about that. I was like, isn't that embarrassing for you? And while he, on a normal day would get to the studio, sit down at 6 a.m. with the clues and like literally crack open a dictionary and mark up the clues with like diacritical annotations to get the pronunciation just so. He didn't do that with the rap stuff. Like he knew that it was funny for people to laugh at him, like that it was sort of a preposterous thing for him to be doing. So he wouldn't listen to the songs. He just, he just went for it.
The one change, it seems the changes that really kind of took the show to another stratosphere, particularly in the internet age, getting rid of the 5-day, increasing the money substantially and getting rid of the 5-day, which leads to Ken Jennings, who, I mean, that feels like whatever the show was at before, I'm sure it could have stayed on its trajectory forever. But that is to me when all of a sudden it seemed like this show I tune into here and there has reached some other level. And since then, I mean, they followed that formula to become much more than a cult favorite, just an absolute phenomenon.
Yeah, I talk about this a bit in the book, but when they did that in the early 2000s, they did it consciously. They were like, oh, this will be fun. This will help with ratings. People like to root for players. They knew that that was a conscious thing, and that has been true. But I don't think they predicted there'd be people like Ken Jennings or James Holzhauer who just split the game open. And of course, Ken Jennings did it right after they eliminated the 5-day limit. I think like 3 players had gone above 5 games prior to him, and I think like 1 got up to 7 or something. But it just creates these characters, and you kind of root for it, and it almost becomes more sport-like in a way. And I think you're totally right. It has so much to do with like its modern popularity.
And explain, I thought, one thing I guess I had never considered is the pure strategy and the game theory and the betting theories and this and that. So we don't want to go down all of them, but explain the difference between your traditional top-down game and the Albert Chu's, I think his first name was Albert, right? Forest Bounce. Arthur Chu, sorry. The daily double hunting and how that, just broke the game wide open.
Yeah, one of the reasons I wanted to write the book is we are at a really kind of interesting moment of Jeopardy gameplay for like what the actual contestants are doing. Where like 5-10 years ago, if you were studying to go on Jeopardy, you made some like president flashcards, vice president flashcards, you had your Kings of England, but that was probably about as much as you did. And now contestants, it's really become the norm for them to prepare in these crazy ways. So like the most famous like advanced Jeopardy strategy is of course the traditional, you start off in one category and you move slowly down through the clues. And there's a strategy called the forest bounce that was coined by a contestant in the second season of the Trebek show. So it's actually quite an old strategy, but he was trying to confuse his opponents by jumping all over the board and jumping from $1 value to another and jumping all between categories. And it's kind of dizzying to watch. And that in more recent years has been used as a way of hunting for the daily doubles. And what has become obvious in this kind of like rising era of advanced statistics on Jeopardy is whoever finds those daily doubles is probably going to be the winner. I mean, unless they get it wrong, but like that is the advantage. That is what you want. That's how you do it. And it becomes a really powerful offensive and defensive strategy as a result of that. And so you see that with people like James Holzhauer, who would move laterally along the bottoms of the board. But that was partly to rack up the money because those are the high value clues, but that's also because the daily doubles are disproportionately found down there, and he was just hunting for them. And of course, that's how you get those crazy, crazy scores.
There's something interesting about that throughout the book, because there's a part of me that just like the same stodgy thing that like gets mad at the Houston Rockets playing basketball the way they do, like that there's something about that feels like button mashing to me. And I'm like, that's not pure. Like you should just know the name of Franklin Roosevelt's dog. Like you just know it because you love it, whatever. And it's all kind of grounded in a romance that is probably not real. And yet there is this fellowship that you describe among the people that are competing in it that is really real, that there's this community of quiz weirdos, like not all of whom are Jeopardy people, some of whom are Quiz Bowl people, or, there's like this whole other world that, like the same way that that there's like furries out there, like somewhere there, like back when it was like safe to do it, that there's like a hotel ballroom somewhere in these United States where like a bunch of people are shouting out trivia answers all day long. The community of people that participate in it seems like you took a lot of fun, of like pleasure in writing that chapter. Like I thought that really kind of popped. Like what kind of person from your experience like goes on Jeopardy and what do they get out of it?
I mean, certainly
don't be afraid to generalize in ways that are bad.
Yeah. To all the Jeopardy contestants.
What are nerds like?
I mean, I made the joke on Twitter. There was literally 5 names in there. I was like, oh, I know that person.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I've been edited by like 4 different people in your book. But like tell me a little bit about like who those people are.
Yeah, I mean, so Jeopardy is designed to be played from home. It is about the millions of people playing on their couch, and the next step of that, of course, is it is sort of designed for you to watch it and think like, I could do that. Like I could get on Jeopardy. But with this kind of semi-professionalization of the Jeopardy base, it's not really your housewife or your plumber who just kind of wandered in on their lunch break. Like that, those days are probably mostly gone. But I mean, I think it's, for a lot of people, Jeopardy is this lifelong goal. And it is, this bookish person is probably somebody who watched Jeopardy as a kid. I mean, I having talked to a whole lot of Jeopardy contestants, like the vast majority of them love this show, have this like incredible attachment to it. And it is really hard to get on Jeopardy. So about 100,000 people take the online contestant test every year. And of those 100,000, 2,500 are invited to an audition, usually in person, this year Zoom. And of that group, only about 400 new contestants get to play every season. So there are people who just spend like literally just decades trying to get on Jeopardy. And I mean, and you can be a really, really good trivia player, and it's just so hard to get there. Like James Holzhauer took the contestant test every year for more than a decade before he finally got invited on the show. So it is just this obsessive thing.
Well, it's weird. It's interesting too, because trivia obsessive or a trivia nerd, it's not the same. It's not like a hyper specific thing. You have to have a broad general knowledge that is
right.
I mean, that's kind of what seems to separate it, and why it does seem like, which we have to mention, please don't be misogynistic to the women on the show on social media. Terrible.
Yeah.
I knew that was coming at some point, and I'm like,
yeah, it is definitely part of it. I mean, I was amazed as somebody who spends a lot of time online that how positive the Jeopardy community generally is. Like, it really is kind of a very supportive, positive, not awful place, which is really rare on the internet. But then of course you have all these Jeopardy viewers who just, they look up the contestants to tell them that they were dumb for missing this clue. Or
I think some of that goes to the community, is because you're not super hyper obsessive about one thing. I don't know. It seems like that broad knowledge kind of base, and you have to know a little bit here, is a certain type of personality that's kind of, you got to kind of get along a little bit to not be, the one person who knows all the things about X. It's more like, I know a whole bunch about everything, and it seems to attract like a personality that's more open.
Yeah. I think that's true. And I mean, I think there is an interesting problem that Jeopardy has solved kind of continuously, is that it's not really fun to watch people do trivia normally. Like, it wouldn't be fun if your bar's local pub night trivia was televised. Like, nobody wants that. Like, even the people who go to that don't want that. Like Quiz Bowl is very serious, and Quiz Bowl is this academic competition that actually a lot of Jeopardy contestants do when they're, high school students or college students. But like, nobody wants that TV show. Like, that's not fun. So there is something about like what they demand of the contestants on Jeopardy.
Your description of Quiz Bowl was harrowing. Like, it sounds so brutal, because like, I mean, I guess that's another thing I knew that existed out there, but it's it actually, like, it sort of makes you appreciate the formal like rigor and clarity of Jeopardy, because what you describe is carnage. Like, it is just like, you get points for answering the question sooner. Like, nobody ever lets the question finish. Everybody's like just shouting answers out.
It's not for the audience. It is proudly not for the audience. Like, it is just like knives out. How much do you know?
Yeah. There's something about, so I was wondering about this too, because another group of people that really emerges in an interesting way in the book are the people that just sort of facilitate Jeopardy being as smooth and like orderly and kind of like soothing in its way as it is, that like it always works. Like, everything happens exactly the right way. Like, and I was struck by the fact that these people have spent decades of their lives working on this.
So many people too. It was like there's so many positions are filled by people who never left. It's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, Trebek long joked that a job at Jeopardy was an annuity, that you just start, you go on forever. And it's true. Like, a huge portion of the Jeopardy staff has been there like literally for decades. And you kind of are like the new kid on the block if you haven't been there for more than a decade. But you have, I think, a thing you would not expect about Jeopardy is they have this incredible contestant department that for the actual contestants, those are the only people they get to interact with really at Jeopardy, because of this federal law about like the sanctity of quiz shows. And it is like this wonderful group of like super warm people who just specialize in working with people on what is probably the most stressful, terrifying, high stakes day of their whole lives. And I mean, when you watch Jeopardy, you can see kind of like a pack of people descend on the contestants when they go to commercial. And that's who those people are. They're just, you know, trying to keep them loose. Like, oh, hey, hon, you've got it. Like they're lovely.
Well,
Yeah, you write very well about, there's one woman, I want to say her last name is Story, but I'm not sure if that's right.
Maggie Speak.
Yeah, I knew it was
actually just retired. Yeah.
Yeah, but who seems like a wizard in the way that like an elementary school teacher can sometimes appear to be a wizard to you as like a normal person. Where you're like, this person has a job that like,
it's
hard. I don't know how she figured out that she was good at it, but she is just every day out there like making people calm or making them like believe in themselves and stuff. It's a remarkable like crew of characters.
Yeah, she is this beloved figure in the Jeopardy community, and people who competed decades ago still talk about like, oh, Maggie is the best. Like, she is so beloved.
And then, but you talk about how hard it is to get on, how long, and then there was a stat. There's all these incredible stats. First of all, so I do not forget, the best details: you cannot bet $69 or $666. That is fantastic. But what they find on that massive scoreboard, the defending champion wins the next game 46% of the time.
It's something like that. It's almost 75% of contestants on Jeopardy, and I had somebody much smarter than me do this for me because I am not to be trusted with numbers. But my cat has decided to come bother us. She loves Jeopardy, big fan. Just under 75% of all Jeopardy contestants lose in their first game, and so if you consider, it's worse than it would just if it were just like random odds, because the defending champion does kind of have this built-in advantage. So it is talking to contestants. I mean, it was a really interesting reporting project because you're talking to a lot of people who did spend years trying to get there and did want it their whole lives, and it meant so much to them. And then of course when the game doesn't go their way, as it doesn't for the vast majority of people, it really is this heartbreaking moment. And I think like a great thing about Trebek is he got that. Like, he knew how hard it was to get there and how much it meant to the people who were there, and I think that made him so good.
So tell us a little bit about your time with him. He comes off in this book actually more charming than I might have guessed. I'm not sure what I thought about him other than he's not one of the QAnon former game show hosts, which seems to be a large category.
Our sanest game show host.
I mean, I think Wink Martindale is now Proud Boy. I'm not sure. But I
think he's a benevolent force.
I don't want to. That's true. I've not seen him. Apologies to Wink.
Get us sued by Wink Martindale. Come on, man.
But tell us what it was like hanging out with him. What did you not know about him that you learned in time with him?
I should show my mug that I am drinking wine out of. So I am a non-neutral analyst of Trebek. But it was shocking to me to see how much he was who he seemed to be on the show. He was like, he really cared about trivia. Like, he really was this like scholarly figure that he seemed to be. I mean, like, he in the early years especially, like, he would brag about the fact that he took the really hard contestant test every year for his first 15 or 20 years on the job, just to like prove that he could hang. And one of the funnier things I learned from talking to contestants is at the end of the episode, you could see him walk over to where the contestants are and shake the champion's hand, and you can see that they've got some kind of chit chat, but you can't hear anything. They cut the mics. And what I learned is that a lot of the time what he was doing is he just wanted to talk about whatever the final Jeopardy clue had been. And if it was something that he personally thought was really tricky, he was like, how did you get it? Like, did you get this hint that was in it? Like, did you really know that, or were you guessing? Or like, worse for these heartbroken people who just lost on Jeopardy and are just had the most stressful 22 minutes of their lives. He was just like, well, don't you remember seeing this in the news? Like, come on, like, you knew that. Like he really actually cared about it. So it was wild to just kind of see it. I mean, that was him.
That dynamic, what you described there at the very end too, is always the thing that I think it's hard to know what makes a good game show host. Like, it's as a job description, it seems very opaque to me. And yet the fact that he could break balls, for lack of a better term, like in the way that he did, and have it generally seem to be, obviously everybody that was on there was thrilled to be around him and to be meeting him and stuff. But it's a strange sort of like energy to be able to maintain, like to not seem impatient with people, to not be like sort of hamming it up one way or the other.
Yeah.
Do you think that the show can go on without him?
Yes.
I mean, I know it will, but
yeah, I mean, he was the first to say that Jeopardy would go on, and really was like a true believer in the model of Jeopardy. And I mean, in his background was he had worked on all of these other quiz shows before Jeopardy, and none of them lasted more than like 3 seasons or something like that. And he even continued to sort of host other shows on the side when he was first with Jeopardy. And I mean, when Jeopardy came along, he had been out of work for nearly a year. Like, so as good as he was, like, Trebek alone was not this like magical person who could just suddenly make your game show a hit. But I think that he really believed in the magic of it, and believed that it would continue to just be this mega hit of a show with 10 million people watching every night. And that I don't think anybody could do it, but I think that it's a really good game, and like the contestants are going to continue to love it this way and work like this, and the staff that's been there for decades, like they're still there. So I think he believed it, and I believe it as well.
It's a really interesting needle, though, and that I was thinking about this before, and then you say it in your book, so clearly I'm smart. That he reminded me more of a Cronkite than Pat Sajak or Bob Barker or whoever. And he has this interesting spot where he's an authority and kind of stentorian, but also doesn't have the self-importance thing that would ruin that whole thing. If he really believed that he was this knowledge giver from on high, it wouldn't work. But he's like a newsman who also is playing a newsman. It's a really interesting role that no other game show host, not that I watch them all, but they all seem cut from something else, more of a Regency sort of backslapping elbow, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, David, you were just talking about the way in which he could sometimes sort of lay into the contestants, and I think that was a really intentional thing. Like, he was, in addition to everything else, like, he was a really good performer, and he knew that people liked those moments where a contestant says something silly about whatever their hobby is, and he kind of leans back and is like, oh, I see. Like, but he both knew that like the audience at home like that, but also like the contestants were usually in on the joke. Like, I feel like I see like angry internet commenters sometimes who are like, oh, like that Trebek, he's such a jerk. But I have talked to a lot of those contestants who are in those viral moments, and for them, it was like this life highlight. I'm sure
they waited
rinsed by Trebek.
That was it. They wait your whole life to get fucking owned on television by Alex Trebek. Like, it's not.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. A lot of those personal anecdotes are terrible.
I mean, it's hard. Like, I write about this in the book, but I was able to go to a Jeopardy audition and had kind of negotiated with producers that I would just be a fly on the wall. And then at the last minute, Maggie Speak, who we were just talking about, was like, you know what? No, I think you should have the experience of taking the test and like going through this. And I suddenly, having just, spent months and months interviewing people about, like, oh, really, your hobby, interesting. Like, so I suddenly had to like come up with my own fun facts, and just like, was like, well, I have a cat. Like,
yeah, it seems really kind of, again, it's like the fact that it's a TV show really comes through, because the people are trying to, like, they have to sort of calibrate their appeal too, to try to get some sort of rise out of Trebek, but also, as you write about, like, to get there in the first place. Like, it's not just enough to answer the questions, right?
Yeah. So I mean, at auditions, and this is kind of a surprising thing, I think, for a lot of people, like, so if you're at an audition, you have already passed this really hard 50 question test, and Jeopardy doesn't even actually say what a passing score is, but you somehow made it. And then you take a second test. So they do care about how smart you are. But then the last part is this kind of crucial stumbling block where they basically just see how you'd be on TV, and they just bring you up and they have you play a mock game. They don't care how you do in the mock game. They're just kind of trying to see like if you can banter, like if you have like a fun 2-sentence story about yourself. But I mean, obviously the standards are such that you know, each night of Jeopardy is those were the winners of their personal personality contest.
So I do have to ask on a, as you said, bittersweet note. I sent this to you. I've mentioned on the show that my dad died this summer, and in his obit, I mentioned that he loved to relax and watch Jeopardy. There he is, and there's Alex. When did Alex's cancer, when he made it public, at what point were you reporting? Had you already met with him? Was that always in the back of your mind? Because I think, to your credit, you don't fixate on the book, because I doubt he would have wanted that to begin with. But also, that's his story. That's not the story of Jeopardy, in some sense. So I would like to know when you found out, how that affected your reporting, and you know how it's sort of affecting you now at this strange.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I mean, it has been surreal, and it has been bittersweet, and I mean, really sad. Like, this is a person I've spent a lot of time not just talking to, but just, you know, kind of thinking about and watching on TV, like I think probably everyone here. But what the story behind that is sort of weird in that in early 2019, in January 2019, from that passage I was reading about, I was at the Jeopardy studio to cover the All-Star games for The Ringer. It was going to be a feature story for The Ringer, but my angle that I had pitched, that I was kind of working on, was Jeopardy confronting the idea of a maybe, hopefully quite distant future without Trebek.
Oh, wow.
And that was the feature. And that obviously was before his diagnosis. And then as I was actually, you know, back here in DC working on the story, the news broke of his diagnosis, at which point absolutely nobody wanted to think about, me least of all, what Jeopardy would be like after Trebek. So that eventually that kind of led to the book, in the sense that I think there were these bigger questions about change coming to Jeopardy. I mean, it's not, as we were talking about, it's not really a show that changes. Like and I mean, also in the sense of its host, like he was the host for more than 36 years. It was a constant, and I think it's like an important thing for a lot of people. It's a very comforting thing. So yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, thunderstruck, sad, but it kind of kicked off this reporting as well.
And you know, when was the last time you talked to him, and did he see a galley? Did he read? What did he know about the book?
I wish I knew that. The last time I saw him was this January, when so just before the world went to shit. At the greatest of all time tournament was currently airing. So he did this media event with the 3 contestants from that, Brad, James, and Ken, and Jeopardy's then executive producer, who actually retired at the end of last season. So there is kind of a major changing of the guard happening, kind of on every level of the show right now. Yeah, so I saw him there, and he it was like this TV critics conference, and the TV critics never get worked up about anybody, and it was like a standing ovation for Trebek, and there was like a media scrum afterwards where just like these like very calm TV critics just like rushed the stage and were gathered around him, like you know, phones in his face. It was like being in like the locker room during the World Series or something. Like it was crazy.
He must arguably be one of the most recognizable Americans around. I mean, I'm sure there are very few people who could walk into almost any neighborhood in the country, and some of the people will know who he is, you know, outside of,
yeah.
I mean, it just by the sheer nature of the show. And one thing I think that is interesting that I just wanted to say, because I assumed Ken Jennings would be the best host there are rules about not people who have no other people on Jeopardy. Basically, if you have talked to anyone else, you can't be the host, which is interesting, and I had no idea because that makes
it's more the other way around. It's more that the contestants couldn't be contestants if they have talked to anybody at the show. So because of these federal laws, and because of the show's kind of interpretation of them, and this is common amongst game shows, where if you know anybody in any capacity, like somebody you like met one, like a friend of a friend of a friend, you can't go on the show. You can't compete. So there are a lot of people who are waiting for somebody they know to like retire to move on to another show so they can finally get their shot on Jeopardy. But that raises this problem with Ken, because he's been in the trivia community for decades and has been like this kind of ambassador of Jeopardy for the last 16 years. So he knows not just like a lot of the aspiring contestants, but also a lot of the ones who have been really trying to get on the show the longest and are kind of most devoted to the cause. And now that he works for the show at all, those people might have trouble getting on. I don't think Jeopardy has said specifically what they're doing about that problem, but that becomes infinitely more complicated if he is in fact on the set every day.
I'm going to say that the reason I can't go on Jeopardy is because Ken Jennings replied to me once on Twitter.
There you go.
Legally, that is airtight.
Sorry, guys. Yeah.
I'm trying to get him to call in. Thanks, Ken.
Ugh, I hate that guy. We do have questions, so we should.
We better run the clip because that's what we do, and this is the best clip ever. And also, yes, we have more questions and more guests than ever because apparently Greenlight fans don't know sports. They're just fucking nerds.
Hey, come on.
Run the clip. It's so fun.
Football 200.
Your choice. Do or don't name this play in which the quarterback runs the ball and can choose to pitch it to another back. It's an option play. Ryan?
Football 400.
I can tell you guys are big football fans.
Yeah.
Tom Landry perfected the shotgun formation with this team. Dallas Cowboys. Do you think we should go to commercial? Ryan?
Take it on to 600.
Okay, by signaling for one of these, a returner can reel in a kick without fear of getting tackled. Fair catch. 2 clues left, Ryan.
800.
These penalties are simultaneous violations by the offense and defense that cancel each other out. And they are called offsetting penalties. Let's look at the $1,000 clue just for the fun of it. Jimmy?
As Minneapolis's U.S. Bank Stadium prepares to host Super Bowl 52, I'm looking at the Ring of Honor with names from this defensive line that took the Vikings to 4 Super Bowls.
If you guys ring in and get this one, I will die. Who are the purple people eaters? We're going to take a break. I have to talk to them.
So we were talking before we started. That bit is in the book. That section is just described. Claire gives it a couple paragraphs. It is like very vivid, very clean writing. I knew that it would come across as like just avant-garde cringe cinema, and that was so much better than I expected it to be. That was fantastic, delightful.
I should say that all 3 of those contestants are really good. The returning champion there, Ryan Fenster, won I think 6 or 7 games in the he's really good, knows a lot of stuff, but they just didn't know football. And Trebek is just such a good performer.
Yep. It's also the visual of that just being the last category and being totally complete offset against the entirely blank screen.
Oh yeah, they were good enough that they had worked their way through. And by that point, if you're playing a game of Jeopardy, you probably get a sense that the other people are also avoiding that. You're like, oh, I definitely am not going to pick the football category, and then sort of realizing like not only that was true of the other 2, but that you were moving fast enough through the game that you would have time for the excruciating. Like they weren't just gonna like run out the clock and not have to do it. So.
All right, let me start with the first question. Andrew Shaw. Claire, you mentioned that in your writing of the book, you were invited to partake in an in-person audition, which you said was humbling. Can you tell us a bit more about this experience?
Yeah, you know what? one of the beauties of writing a book about very smart people is I just got to talk to people who are much smarter than me. And I so don't have that trivia brain. Like I just so don't have that like quick recall effect. I love trivia. I love watching Jeopardy. I love playing, you know, my bars weekly trivia back when bars were a thing. But I'm just like not very good at it. And at this audition, which was in August of 2019 in Las Vegas at this event called Trivia Nationals, which is sort of the Super Bowl of the trivia world. They held these auditions and you had to do the 50 question test. And if you passed that, you went on to the actual auditions. And I am proud to say I flunked that 50 question test. I did not make it. They tell you to, if you don't make it, they say to just say that you were a single question off. So I guess that's what I'm saying.
Dave, before you ask the next question, this was just put in the chat and I want to read this. We at Fordham University are grateful to Alex Trebek and his wife who endowed a generous scholarship for students from Harlem, where his son Matthew, a Fordham graduate, has a restaurant. Alex credited his Jesuit education, also me too, go Marquette, for his faith and intellectual curiosity, as well as a choice to major in philosophy, which gave him foundation of his Jeopardy skills. Huh.
Hell yeah, good for him.
I think he's
Solid.
actually got a couple restaurants in Harlem. I think there's like a coffee shop named after Lucille, the mother of Trebek, his grandma, and nice. I think like a Mexican restaurant.
That's excellent. Good for them. I will. I'm gonna just quickly, Hunter. This is just the microphone I have to do the podcasts on. Man, that's what's up with the microphone. That question has been asked 2 times, so I wanted to get that in there. It's a Yeti blue thing. Ed Zitron sent it to me, my friend. Thank you, Ed. I'll now the actual question for Claire. So did you get the sense, Jacob Stoller asks, did you get the sense that they're considering any format changes? Nothing radical, but maybe increasing clue value again, for instance?
That is like the most sought after change by like the Jeopardy community is for them to raise the money. I mean, there's a weird thing on Jeopardy where like, even if you win Jeopardy, you don't really win that much money. Like the average prize is like $20,000, which is a great chunk of change. Odds are good you're probably going to pay half of that in tax. But for the 75% of people who don't even win, they just get the $1,000 or $2,000 consolation prize, which they also have to pay tax from, and they're paying their own way to Los Angeles. Like Jeopardy does not put them up. So they are paying for the flight, they are paying for the hotel. So like most contestants are lucky if they break even. I could see that happening. I have talked to the new executive producer who's named Mike Richards and has all kinds of game show bona fides on a lot of kind of zanier shows than Jeopardy. But he said to me that Jeopardy isn't broken. Like the fundamental gameplay of Jeopardy is just not going to change. Like it works really well. It attracts huge audiences. People love it. It's good. It's so on that at least. No, I hope that they increase the money at some point, just as a fan and somebody who's talked to these contestants who like spend a lot of money to lose on Jeopardy.
Yeah, that part of it's heartbreaking.
Do you think it runs the risk of the classic American now billionaire or bust kind of thing? Can it become like it's too much about you can get really rich? Because Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was I mean, one of the problems was it had a lot of trivial questions, not actual trivia, which is why it was kind of hard. I think it actually could make it hard by asking really dumb stuff. But it was also just about you could be rich today. And do you think if Jeopardy were to be something where you could walk away with $1 million, then it becomes much less of what, the community spirit? Do you think that could be hurt by?
I guess I would counter that by saying that James Holzhauer won $2.5 million over 32 days, and Ken Jennings won $1 million from the greatest all-time tournament, in January. But I don't think that Jeopardy wants to be or will ever be like a show with crazy amounts of money. I think a modest increase might happen, but it is never going to be the show that you go on to get super rich. Like it just isn't that show, and I don't think they want it to be that show. I'm sure Sony doesn't want it to be that show, but I don't think the fans really want it to be that show either.
I don't understand this question, Dave.
It's a silly question from Eric Ryberg, who watches all of these. So shout out to Eric, or not all of them, but he's around a lot. As a one-game Jeopardy choker, Claire's book is both the coolest thing that has ever been written and also a direct attack and implicitly violent. My question is, how dare she? And how dare you both? Claire, do you want to start?
Well, I thank you, and I'm sorry. Congrats on making it. One of my favorite things from the Jeopardy community that has come out since the book came out just last week is a Jeopardy contestant, a former champ, I think, or just a contestant, created an index, like went through the book on her own time and created an index, because I actually don't have an index in the book because I'm really, really lazy and awful. Just like exhaustively found the names of every single contestant I mentioned. And I mentioned like 150 different people. I didn't interview every single one of them, but a whole bunch of people get mentioned. And I know I am not in these secret Jeopardy contestant Facebook groups that are very much a thing, but I know that this has like gone around those groups, and people know that they're like on page 72 or whatever it is.
That's great. I hope that you can have the index in the paperback edition of the book.
Yeah,
I think that would be cool. Because I was reading it with an eye on that to a certain extent, because as Patrick said, like we know a lot of people that have been on it just because of like a lot of people have been on it, but also like a lot of like weird sports writer weirdos and blogger types and such like. Also, a girl that I dated in college did really well on it this summer. So it's not all weirdos. Some of them are like stylish people like Elise. It's not all Barry Pacheski. Patrick, you've got an interesting hat on.
He had a great story.
He did have a great. He gave you some good quotes.
Sorry.
No.
Tis
So
the season.
explain yourself.
It was just the Burt Reynolds gag, because actually that the Saturday Night Live thing, very overrated, except for the Burt Reynolds part. It's a funny ad.
I don't know. I thought it was pretty
You know what
good.
the problem is? They did it 500 times, and each one is.
Oh, we got one last question, and it's very good. Do you mind if we go a minute or two over, Claire?
Okay.
This is from Ernie Adams. Claire can check me on this, but I think Trebek actually hosted Jeopardy without the mustache for longer than he did with the mustache. Does this mean that everything will be okay if my dad, whom I have never seen without his mustache, one day decides to shave?
I don't know. I mean, can you still love your dad that way? I don't know. I'm not sure. I'd be a story actually relevant to that is that when Alex Trebek first shaved his mustache, which he did on a whim, mid tape day, just went back to his dressing room and was like, enough, this thing that's been on my face for decades, we're done here. And he went home. He had this great story about, he walks in and it's his wife Jean and his two kids, Matthew and Emily, who are really young at that point, and nobody notices that anything's amiss for a couple minutes. But then Matthew looks up at him, little tiny Matthew, and just bursts into tears. So, let that be a lesson to you.
Yeah.
So basically the point is you will be okay. You're just going to cry.
Yeah, which is fine.
I mean, you can.
Strong men also cry.
Weep for facial hair. There's one more question that is interesting, just because I don't know if people know him, and so give us a little quick background, and then I have one question for you, Claire. Separate from this, do you think Johnny Gilbert will stick around when the show eventually finds a new host, or do you think he'll hang up his lovely jacket and ride off into the sunset? Please tell them who Johnny Gilbert is if they don't know, and his.
Yes, Johnny Gilbert is the legendary announcer of Jeopardy. He's the guy who says, "This is Jeopardy!" and introduces today's contestants and says sophomore instead of sophomore. I mean, he's great. He's a legend. He's also 96.
Which is great. It's insane.
I mean, he's amazing. Yeah. And with COVID, he's entirely remote. But before this, like the only nod to him being like in his mid 90s was just he wouldn't come in the morning and he would like back tape the games when he came in the afternoon. But he was, I mean, I have been on the set with him, and like he's amazing.
Is he the guy in the Cheers episode, which is way better than the Saturday Night Live? Is that him when they cut to the announcer?
Oh, I don't actually know. I'm sure somebody in the comments will know that. I'm not sure. I assume everything else about that episode was like accurate, other than it being.
So at that point in 1980, whatever, he was in his late 60s already.
Yeah, I mean, he's storied. And he's fantastic. Like, he's so good at it. He's still so sharp, so good. I hope he does it till he's 196. But I don't know. I could see him deciding that this is as good a moment as any to retire. But I didn't talk to Johnny for the book, but I could also see it being a thing where with Trebek, like, he just loved doing Jeopardy. Like, he just loved working there and doing it, and like wanted to make more and more and more of it. And I mean, for somebody to keep working until they're, you know, well into their 90s, I mean, I would absolutely believe that that's also the case for him.
If you're wild enough to work until you're 96 at any job, then you're definitely the type of person that would just be like, all right, whatever, let's keep it rolling.
Come for me, Grim Reaper. Yep. Let's see. Like,
there's one more question that I want to ask. I know we're getting close to it, because I'm curious about it too. Alan Hall asks, what do you want to write about next? Doesn't need to be a book. Give yourself a break.
Keep asking me that, and it's horrifying. I have an idea for a book that may or may not happen. It's not a game show though. It's not. It's not the Trivia World. I really wanted to do like a spelling bee book, but I think the spelling bee is probably a little bit tapped out as like a pop culture edifice. Though I intend to keep covering it every year when it comes to DC. But yeah, there's maybe something that is coming down the pipe.
Have you? You've probably been asked this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Who would you like to see be the next host? And then tell very quickly, since we are a official Squawkin Sports bird themed show, tell the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar story, which is awesome.
I will. It is. I mean, it's so hard to imagine anybody else doing it as the host of Jeopardy, and I mean, I think whoever it is, you could do the best job in the world, and it will still just be like this heartbreaking thing. He has long been kind of the fan favorite to do it. I have gotten to know him a bit. He wrote my foreword. I love Ken Jennings. I think he has so much of like what you would want in a Jeopardy host, in that he's smart. He's kind of authoritative. He's funny. Like, he's fun. Funny. He's good on TV. Like during the, you know, greatest of all time tournament, like, it was fun to watch him. Like, so I think he would make a lot of sense and be really good at it. But I do trust that like the Sony Jeopardy powers that be like know what people want in a host, and I have a lot of faith in them. The Kareem Abdul-Jabbar story, he was kind enough to tell me a little bit about his time on Jeopardy. He's been on Jeopardy 4 times. He's won
and he's
twice.
Good, right? He's good.
He's really good. He has this incredible trivia knowledge base. But during one of his games, he, and I don't have the clue in front of me, so you might, but it was an airplane.
It was an airplane.
It was an airplane joke. Yeah. So it's like basically his quote from Airplane. Like, you try dragging so and so up the court.
But yeah.
It's okay. Yeah. But he picks this clue, and Trebek is like, oh, like, you're gonna love it. Like, he's so excited that he's done it. And so Kareem Abdul-Jabbar becomes the first person in Jeopardy history, 1, to guess himself for a clue, and 2, to be wrong. It was not him. It was like Bill Walton, right?
Bill Walton was the answer.
Yeah, I don't know the NBA, so I actually should not.
I mean, it could have been a question about like UCLA basketball too. Like, it could have been like literally the guy that played there after him. I think the
category was UCLA. Like, so he was very gracious answering that, and he told me that he just thought it might be a trick question. So
I just like that he was like, I'm not mentioning Airplane. Airplane was in my past.
Yeah.
We're not going to go there. So we've come to the end. I have a couple of quick announcements. On December 10th, we will have our last show of the year. It is with Pete Croata's book, Hang Time to Prime Time, which is about the rise of the NBA in the 70s and 80s, and Nike and hip hop. And I hooked him up with Curtis Blow. So that's important.
Wow.
Also, this is out, the Best American Sports Writing, which you can get at Greenlight. And if you count the introduction, there are 6 people who've appeared on our 12 episodes who are mentioned in this book, including me. Yes, we have 4 notables.
Yeah, you were in the Menchies, right? Yeah, the notables.
Menchies, but you and Eric are in the intro, because they just listed everybody who'd ever been in the book, because they might not make any more. So that counts.
Yeah, sure.
So buy them both from Green Lights. And, happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Be safe, be smart. Thanks for coming on, Claire. The book is great. If you like Jeopardy at all, you'll love it.
Yeah, super fun stuff. Recommended highly. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Lots of great little fun details. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you December 10th. And if you would take us out, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Patrick, David, and Claire, for a wonderful conversation tonight. And thank you again to everyone who came out and joined us. Again, reminder that you can buy Claire's book and Best American Sports Writing and many others at Greenlight. In store, we're open for browsing or curbside pickup noon to 7 p.m. every day, or online at greenlightbookstore.com for curbside pickup or shipping anywhere in the US. And also, in case you missed any part of tonight's event or you just want to indulge in a rewatch, we'll be posting this on our YouTube channel within the next couple of days, Greenlight Bookstore. So keep an eye out there. Have a great rest of your evening, everyone. And good night.
Good night.
Bye.
See ya.